Hello, everybody. What an intro.
Yeah, I know. I was just jamming out to that sweet, sweet intro music.
And I was like, I wonder how long it is, too, because I didn't know when all of a sudden the cameras were going to be on. But here we are. We are live for the first time ever here at TBRCon, everybody. Happy TBRCon to all.
Yeah, welcome.
Welcome. My name is Charles, the half of the Friends Talking Fantasy podcast. And here with me today, as always, is my lifelong friend and co-host, Dylan.
I'm ready to talk some fantasy with my friend Charles and with you wonderful live viewers.
Yes, live. It's very, very exciting. We got a lot to talk about today. We're gonna start off the morning with a nice conversation about some recent releases in the world of science fiction and fantasy. It's a lovely Sunday morning, even earlier for you, Dylan, way out there in the West. But for me, it's 9 a.m. and a lot of fun book chatting we have in front of us today, don't we?
Yeah, definitely. So we'll be talking about our favorite books that were published in 2022. Still January. I think we still came in just in time to be able to do one of these episodes. And yeah, hopefully it's TBRCon. Hopefully we can help add some freshly published books to your TBRs.
Well said, Dylan. We set a little bit of a criteria for ourselves for books published in 2022, so it's going to kind of be like a top recommendations for last year. And I've got a stack of books next to me, Dylan. You've got a stack next to you as well, right?
I do, yeah. I wasn't able to grab every single book that I have, but I do have a stack over here.
Excellent. So, we'll just keep trading reviews back and forth, and if you guys want to type anything into the chat here, I'm on YouTube. I don't know if there's another chat going on, but I'm at least on the YouTube one. So, if anyone wants to contribute, drop a message in there. Otherwise, Dylan, if you want to get us started here with the book recommendation, take it away.
For sure. Yeah. And we will be taking recommendations for recommendations, by the way. So if you want to type something in the chat and you want to know, hey, I want a fantasy book with, strong female lead or whatever, we got you covered. We're willing to interact with you all. But
yes, we will also take recommendations as well. We're always looking for.
We'll also take recommendations. Yes, gladly. Yeah,
recommendations all around. We'll take them.
Right, we will take them. But in the meantime, let's chat about.
We're gonna have the big guns.
Right. I mean, I felt like I couldn't do a 2022 published books recommendation without chatting about what feels like the breakout hit of 2022. Now #1 New York Times bestseller. That's Babel by R.F. Kuang. You might know R.F. Kuang from the Poppy War trilogy, which we absolutely love as well. But Babel, it's a totally different story, and there's a lot of really awesome things about it that I'll tell you about why you should give this one a read. So Kuang describes this as her love letter and her breakup letter to Oxford, which is the university she attended to get her master's. Rebecca Kuang, she's absolutely an expert on all these topics and also on language. And she takes an approach to this where she constructs a magic system based around the idea of what gets lost in translation around language, which is really cool for, I mean, you folks are readers. I'm sure you're as into words as I am. So it's really cool for folks who are really into that. And it's set in this sort of alternate history, like 1830s Oxford. And it's got that magic system, so it's still fantasy, but she uses that opportunity to dive into these themes of like colonialism and imperialism, and also what the dark side of academia is and how it's sort of enabled, especially these like big institutions over in like England, how it enabled British imperialism. And because of that really awesome recommendation for fans of dark academia. I feel like for those who've read the Poppy War trilogy, which is kind of this like epic military fantasy trilogy, the stakes feel like they're a lot lower. You know, you're not dealing with something like genocide on the like for most of the book. It's like a lot of almost slice of life style, where you're introduced to this character Robin, who is taken from Canton over to England because he demonstrates a talent for these this magic system, and his cohort, who are many people usually who are grabbed from these different countries because they have these language abilities that you don't actually have for people born in England. And it's a lot of just like spending time with this small cohort. So you get to know the characters really intimately, and it doesn't feel like, if you've read the Poppy War, it doesn't feel like you're just like really moving through with that fast pacing. You get to sit and really learn about these people, and the characters I think are extremely strong, in part because you get that kind of time with them. So and RF Kwong, absolutely incredible character writer. Obviously, she does a great job in the Poppy War as well with that, especially with Rin. But it goes into these ideas of the subtitle is actually the necessity of violence. It goes into these ideas of rebellion as well. And so it's not entirely a pacifist novel or anything like that for those of you who are into those kind of themes in your novels. So I absolutely love this book. It's obviously been an extremely popular book for this year. You've probably seen it all over the place. You're probably getting used to this cover by now. And the only thing that I would give a caveat is, and this is hard to say about something that is a #1 New York Times bestseller, but it is pretty dense and at times inaccessible, I feel like, for some people if they're not into that more like academic way of writing. I mean, I've seen criticism of it where they say it's written like an essay. There are like footnotes. It's obviously a pretty heavy book over here, both in tone and in physical weight. So it's it's an absolutely incredible effort. It's got great prose, like I said, great character writing, interesting setting, awesome, like pretty well defined, I would say, hard magic system for big fans of that. These deep themes are explored with a deft hand. So all these awesome things about it that make it maybe my favorite book that was published in 2022, but at least worthy of mention in this recommendations episode.
Always a safe bet to start with the #1 New York Times bestseller.
Yeah.
And with R.F. Kwong as well, we're big fans of her Poppy War series. We read through and discussed that on the show. A lot I loved about that. I loved her intense action scenes, her ability to pull from her studies of like Chinese history and Asian history as an influence for her work, and her character work in the Poppy War for sure. So I haven't read Babel. Dylan kind of went rogue and read that one, but I don't think you can go wrong with R.F. Kwong, and she's still continuing to write at a rapid pace as well. She's got another book coming out relatively soon. I know she was teasing the cover of it not too long ago, and it sounds like it's going in yet another different kind of tone and direction compared to both the Poppy War and then Babel, which was more literary. So we'll see. Very, she's one of the authors that we just are watching very closely because she seems to be at the very cutting edge of modern fantasy. So what better way to kick off our 2022 discussion? And I agree in the chat, footnotes are awesome. That's something I just read. So absolutely true. I just finished reading Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, and that goes wild with the footnotes. You'll see pages that are more
Charles.
footnote than copy, which is like, what's the footnote?
This one has been described, Charles. This one has been described as sort of a, God, I don't know if she said counterpoint, but a response in some ways to Jonathan Strange, which is interesting. Like Babel. Yeah. So I'd be really interested to hear your take. Either I got to go back and read Jonathan Strange because I haven't read that one, or you got to go forward and read Babel because you got to see how those two compare and contrast.
Or both, I guess. But yeah, Jonathan Strange, as big as Babel is, Jonathan Strange is way bigger. So, or actually, they're probably very close. I can't say for sure. It's hard to tell because my book is so warped. It's got thick pages and illustrations and stuff. So who knows what the real word count is? But yeah, that would be. And I can kind of get that they even look similar. The very black covers and a lot of emphasis on academia. But Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell is academia from the 1800s, and the book itself is not academic. It tells very much a fantasy story. It's just its characters are academics at their core, and it kind of takes some fun shots at academia while it's doing it too. It very good. And I have a lot to say about that, and we're going to cover it on the show very soon because I didn't read 800 pages for nothing. We're talking about it on the show, and it's just a really interesting book, and I have a lot of thoughts on it. But it was not published in 2022, so I will withhold from talking about it any longer today. But yeah, Babel, R.F. Kuang, it's at the top of my TBR pile. If there's such a thing as a FOMO pile, if this was FOMOCon, that'd be number one for me because it's just so popular and everyone's talking about it. And I'm like, I don't know anything about it. I haven't read it. Feeling left out. But I guess I'll take a shot at recommending a series. So in June 2022, we had the opportunity to read and discuss The Final Strife by Sarah L. Arifi. This is her debut novel. We were able to get an advanced copy, and we were able to talk to Sarah like a mere few days before the book was published, and that was a really interesting time to talk to Sarah because we had no idea where this book was going to go. And of course, it instantly launched into a Sunday Times bestseller, and we were not surprised at all. So a little bit about The Final Strife. It's going to be a trilogy. We've already gotten the cover reveal for the Battle Drum, which hopefully, I can't remember if it's going to come out this year or not, but I think it is. So that's very exciting. And it's inspired by Sarah's actual Ghanaian and Arabian heritage. And right away, you can tell that this book's setting is really unique, and I found it engaging as well. Just the way they tell the narrative and the way these characters, the way like society's laid out. I almost, we compared it to Hunger Games a little bit, and that like there's the layers of the city, and like the further in you go, the more upper class it gets, and they play these tournaments and games and things. But I'll read the description super quickly about the story. It's Shyla dreams of days growing up in the resistance, being told she would spark a revolution that would free the empire from the red-blooded ruling class's tyranny. That spark was extinguished the day she watched her family murdered before her eyes. And what's interesting about Shyla is, I kind of think of, you have two characters. You have Shyla and you have Anor. And it's not spoilers to say, and I'm going to keep this very spoiler free. It's not spoilers to say they have a relationship similar to The Departed. Shout out if anyone's watched The Departed, that Matt Damon and Leonardo DiCaprio have in that movie, where it's like, a person snatched from birth from the upper class and raised in the lower class, and vice versa. And what's an added layer of intrigue to that is your class is determined also by your magic system, which is also determined by the color of your blood. So you have red, which is the blood of the elite, and they can do magic. Blue is the blood of what they call the workers, of the resistance. And then there's clear, which is the blood of slaves. And they actually, like, their power, they have some sort of powers that you're kept kind of in the dark about because they've been oppressed. They actually cut the hands and the tongues off of anyone with clear blood and force them into servitude. So it's a very like intense, dark world. You have lots of people, in poverty and under subjugation, and this story both of classism and of race, and actually making it defined by the color of their blood sparks a very interesting trilogy here. And the whole story kicks off with, there's this idea of rebellion, and Shyla's supposed to be this catalyst for rebellion, and she's fighting her own, there's themes of substance abuse, there's depression, things like that. And so she's like, do I even want to do this? Is it even possible? Meanwhile, they're thrown into this Hunger Games like series of tournaments. It's surprisingly action packed. And then Shyla as a character, we had a lot of conversations about when we were talking to Sarah about just the research and the inspiration behind this character. And that's worth checking out. I'd say if you have any interest in this book, check out our interview with Sarah. She's super fun, and her the way she went from like inspiration for this book to getting published. I mean, she got a book deal within like, what was it doing? Like 2 weeks of talking to, like, reaching out to publishers. Like, her story is very unusual and very interesting. She went from just writing trunk novels and working in marketing to being a Sunday Times bestseller in rapid pace. And so hear her tell that story is very interesting. And we tell this story all the time because when we got the advanced copies, it was one of those PDF
Speaking
formats.
of rapid pace.
Yeah, exactly. That's where I was going.
I know where you're going.
Speaking of rapid pace, we got these PDF copies that weren't really numbered. And, I was on vacation at the time, and I was just reading it, and it was literally like, we were trying to plan stuff on the vacation, and I was like, well, maybe we could just like hang out here for a little while longer and then go out. Like, what's the rush, guys? We're on vacation. I just really wanted to read this book, was what was happening. And I read through it, and I was talking to Dylan about it afterwards. By the time it was published, I was able to look on Goodreads. I was like, Dylan, did you realize this was like 600 pages long? We both were guessing that it was around 400. And that just goes, that just speaks to Sarah's ability to write action and keep the story moving. Very interesting relationships in this book as well. So all in all, highly recommend The Final Strife by Sarah El-Arifi. If anything we said is of any interest, or even if you're still on the fence, check out our interview and then check out the book. It's a Sunday Times bestseller. You cannot go wrong.
Yeah, starting off with those heavy hitters. I love The Departed reference there, Charles. I never really thought about that. Of course, you were teeing me up for my Mark Wahlberg impression, right? That's why you brought it up, right?
Oh, of course. Yeah.
Yeah.
You don't know what we do.
You want. I know what you want. I know what you want. Can I curse on here? I don't know. I won't risk it. Probably, since
you can curse on their pod, which is fun.
SFF. Yeah, but we'll refrain, and no one needs more of my Mark Wahlberg. Yeah, the bad boy says yes. I know what you want. I know what you know, and you know fucking co-op. So, because that's the best part.
I don't know. Like, you don't know what we do. If you knew what we do, we wouldn't do what we do.
Right.
Fantastic movie. Highly recommend watching that too. But it did not come out in 2022, so hard to put it on the list.
True, but yeah, I love that story that we probably told on the podcast like 3 or 4 times about how we totally didn't know the length of the book, and it just cruises by. And it's a really delicate line to walk, and Sarah walks it so well, to write a book where it doesn't feel rushed, but somehow it goes by like preposterously quickly.
Mhm.
And I think that always makes me think about The Poppy War by Rebecca Kuang, which we mentioned earlier. Books where you're like, okay, yeah, I'm really getting this character's arc. I'm really understanding who they are. I think the portrayal of substance use in this book, like I have a master's in psychology, and I am like very impressed. You can tell Sarah really did her research, and just the way that the main character comes off here. It's like, sometimes you can tell if she hasn't been able to use, she starts getting irritable and stuff like that. But it's done in this really subtle way where she's just kind of like act out a little bit more, and like a keen-eyed reader will be like, oh, what's going on here? She seems a little on edge.
Mhm.
But because Sarah is such a great writer, it's kind of subtext, and it's like reading between lines rather than this
Yeah.
like beating you over the head with like, Jyla had not had her fix in so long that she
Right.
was feeling
Right.
irritable and she was taking it out on Honor. Is like,
Right.
no, that is not how Sarah does it. So really well done, I think, from a psych perspective, or at least my psych perspective. And it is just a phenomenal book. I love these books that take us away from the typical medieval European setting. We love those books too, but
We sure
sometimes
do.
need a breath of fresh air, or fresh of breath air, as Joel said in our
I
most
did
recent
say that on the
episode.
podcast recently. I
Right.
was like, "What?"
So, yeah. So, if you're looking for either of those things, then this is going to be a great book for you.
Well said. So, what else you got for us, Dylan?
What I've got for you is one, I feel like sometimes I'm like, we talk about the same a couple books so many times, and then these two, how could you not start with the New York Times bestseller, the Sunday Times bestseller, and books that we truly believe in by fantastic authors? So I'm okay with that. But I was like, I got to bring something to the table that we basically never talk about. And I decided, we briefly mentioned this when we were reviewing 200 books in whatever we said it was, like about
We
2 hours,
tried 200 minutes
however
and we
long.
blew right past that. So, 2.5
No, we did
hours.
under 200, but we didn't do under 2 hours.
Oh,
But it was
2
like
hours. Right, right,
two
right. We did
hours
under
and
200.
22 minutes or
Right,
something.
right.
But
Mm.
anyway, we briefly mentioned this one. This was a 5-star read for me. It's called Lost in Time by A.G. Riddle. And unfortunately, I left my copy of that book when I was on vacation reading it down in Florida. So I don't have it on me, but it's got a phenomenal cover. It's actually the reason that I initially picked it up, just walking by in the bookstore. And it is this like near future sci-fi tale that is it's got really cool premise. There's another reason when you pick up a book, you just read the back in a bookstore and you're like, whoa, okay, I'm feeling this. And it is did I say the author? Lost in Time by A.G. Riddle. And it is about like a future where this like time machine type thing has been created. And what they've decided to do with it, because it has a lot of limitations, but one thing it can do is just like send people to an alternate timeline in the past. And they figured out, okay, good way to use this is we're going to send like the worst of the worst criminals, like the people who would have gotten the death penalty in the past. We're just gonna send them to like the Triassic or Jurassic period all the way back so they can deal with dinosaurs and they can do whatever they want once they're there. But we're just gonna send them back and create this alternate timeline. And now we don't have to think about it anymore. So what ends up happening is the main character of this book is one of the creators of this time machine thing, and then he ends up falsely convicted for a murder, and they end up using the time machine to send him back to those dinosaur ages. And this isn't like a survivalist guy here who's got it all figured out. He's just some scientist. And he's got to figure out, okay, how am I going to survive this, like literally dealing with dinosaurs and stuff like that, while his daughter, who starts a book as like a late teenager, maybe like 19 years old, she is kind of trying to uncover the mystery in the present, like in 2027, where she's like trying to get him exonerated, and then also trying to work with the remaining scientists to see if they can figure out how to pull him back. So it's got these awesome mystery and like thriller elements to it, where she's trying to discover the murderer. It's got, of course, these like dinosaur and almost, they call it like a man versus nature plot, right? Charles, you remember
Mhm.
the book? I think we read this when we were kids. Hatchet. You remember
Oh yeah.
Hatchet?
Hmm.
It's got like total shades of Hatchet, which was one of my favorite books as a kid. That book where the
Interesting. I
kid
haven't
gets
thought
like
about that in a hot
stranded
minute.
after, yeah, right. The book where the kid gets stranded after a
Where's my
plane
Hatchet
crash and
fans
just
in the
like by
chat?
himself. Yeah, Hatchet fans turn up, right? So it's yeah, he's just out there like trying to figure out how to survive. And there's literally a moment where he references Hatchet. Like, so I was already like thinking, I was like, this is like Hatchet. And he's like, this reminds me of that book Hatchet. So it's a very
That's funny.
self-aware installment as well. And yeah, nice Hatchet emoji there, Charles.
Oh, you noticed. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. So uh, yeah, I really enjoyed that, but it's also, I think primarily more than anything, like the hook is very like dinosaurs and blah, blah, blah. But more than anything, it's like this intimate tale between like a daughter and father who actually are not even together throughout it, but it's also a, um, like a really incredible time travel story. And I think that the way that it's usually pitched and the premise of it, they leave that out. And maybe it's because time travel is like, I feel like so overdone at this point. I'm just kind of, whenever I hear like time travel is the main thing being pitched, I'm like, oh god, like here we go again. It is, but this is done in a way that I've never seen before. So it's yeah, really like great character writing, really interesting themes of family and all that kind of stuff. Uh, awesome premise. It's got dinosaurs. It's got time travel, and I'll say this is one of those books that, you know, sometimes you read like these long epic fantasies and all this kind of stuff, and this one, I don't know. You start to almost be like, all right, like this is plotting. This is like
Mhm.
moving along a little slow with those epic fantasies. And it's like this one was one that really helped me almost like rediscover my joy for reading, which you can
Mhm.
like need every once in a while. You know, you
Mhm.
get those like reading slumps. And this one, I was like, oh wow, I'm back to a place where when I'm not around, I'm not reading the book, I'm like, oh wow, I wish I was reading that book right now. Like I want to get back to reading that book because it's like the chapters are super short. It's got some of these like thriller elements and just like you want to keep moving with it. So you got uh yeah, really awesome sci-fi book
Mm.
over here.
That's yeah. No, you had talked about that one in our 200 episode special, and I took note of it. I think I described the premise of getting rid of criminals by sending them in the past in a different timeline to be reckless. So,
A little bit.
so that's it reminds me of that Simpsons episode where Homer invents the time machine and keeps going back. He went back to like the Jurassic period and just like sat on a bug. And then he came back and it's like, it's raining donuts or something. And you're like, oh yeah, well, I
Oh
wonder.
well, I mean, then someone's got to go back and sit on a bug because raining donuts. That sounds awesome.
It was a cautionary tale though, but curious to see how the time travel elements play out in that. Sounds like it was a really
Yeah,
exciting read.
it was too, which surprised me because I don't see a lot of pop for this book, and I'd never heard of it when I first saw it in the bookstore. Uh, this book was a Goodreads like user choice finalist, so it's got a,
Hmm.
you know, a little. It didn't win, but it's got a little bit of that nominee pop to it.
Made it to the top. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Dylan, I'm going to bring up my next book now, and there's a couple here that we've already talked about on the show, and probably even on SFF Pod as well. So I'm gonna try and save those for later. I want to make sure I give enough time to a relatively new discussion for us. Um, this one I had pitched on Friends Pitching Fantasy just a few short weeks ago, and it was not chosen. But I did say on the episode that whether you choose it or not, I'm reading it. It's next on my to read list, and I'm talking about The Spear Cuts Through Water by Simon Jimenez. This is a really interesting book for a lot of reasons. The first of which, like, it got on my radar initially. It was given to me as a gift, and once I was aware of it, and then on my travels online, I started to see it pop up pretty frequently. It's a relatively new release, and especially amongst the sci-fi fantasy community that we have discourse with online, I've started to see it pop up more and more, people reading it, and it has, people saying things like, "Oh, it's such a like unique story. The story writing is so interesting," and I did my best to pitch it on Friends Pitching Fantasy, but I had no idea what I was pitching at the time, and now I'm about halfway through it. And since we're talking about 2022 reads, I'll give the caveat that I haven't finished it yet, but I already think there's a lot of interesting things to say. So, our show's in the chat. That's awesome. So
That's me.
nice.
Or Charles is really good at multitasking.
Dylan
morning.
would never give me access
Good
to
morning,
our show's
Jonathan.
social media accounts. I'm not allowed.
Yeah, not allowed.
But I will talk about The Spear Cuts Through Water. I'm going to read the short synopsis here, just to give it a little bit of a shout out. So keep your ears perked, people, because if this sounds interesting to you, I highly recommend it already. So the people suffer under the centuries-long rule of the Moon Throne. The royal family, the despotic emperor and his monstrous sons, the Three Terrors, hold the countryside in their choking grip. They bleed the land and oppress the citizens with the frightful powers they inherited from the god locked under their palace. But that god cannot be contained forever. With the aid of June, a guard broken by his guilt-stricken past, and Kima, an outcast fighting for his future, the god escapes from her royal captivity and flees from her own children, the triplet terrors, who would drag her back to her unholy prison. And so it is that she embarks with her young companions on a 5-day pilgrimage in search of freedom and a way to end the Moon Throne forever. The journey ahead will be more dangerous than any of them could have imagined, both a sweeping adventure story and an intimate exploration of identity, legacy, and belonging. The Spear Cuts Through Water is an ambitious and profound saga that will transport and transform you, and is nothing like you've ever read before. So,
Ooh.
Huge shout out blurb here. And I'd say it's pretty accurate, although the tone in which this is written is very different to the tone in which the rest of this book is written. This book, the first thing that strikes me about it is the narration, right? So just to give you guys a setup here, this book is told you have a character who is dreaming, and in his dream, he is dreaming that he is watching a play put on by spirits. And this play is the story described in the jacket that I just read of June and Kima traveling with the gods and the emperor and all that. So the point of view will switch rapidly from the dreamer's real life to him in the audience watching the play to actually the perspectives of the people in the play, which is the main story. And it weaves in and out of them there's no chapters in this book. There's no chapter 1, the so-and-so. There's literally no chapters.
That scares me.
Just every couple paragraphs are broken by its own line break of dialogue here. Usually it's like an action line or a line of dialogue or an action line or something. And that happens every page. There's one. But other than that, there's nothing. Well, I should say that that's also the story takes place over like 4 or 5 days. So each day there's like a page break of like day one. And so there is, I guess you could say, like act breaks in this. But for the most part, no such thing as chapters. POV can change um, within paragraphs, and it changes
Wow.
fast. And it doesn't explain who you're in the perspective of. It just goes, and it will change. It'll go from second person to third person, back and forth very quickly. It'll be like, oh, you were talking to so and so, and you watched your dad in your apartment. And that's the other thing. Like the guy dreaming, it takes place, I guess, hard to say when exactly, but there's radio and cities and bars. But then in this dream world, it's your typical fantasy, like spears, swords, bows, magic, castles, that kind of stuff. So it is going around like crazy. So when they say ambitious in the jacket description, they are not kidding. It is a very ambitious narrative structure and switch of POV, and it's interesting. I'll say that. I like the idea of these line breaks. And another thing that this book does is, let's say there's a line like, oh, Kimo walked past the guards and like kept moving. Then the next sentence will be in italics and will go, oh, we didn't think anything of him at the time. And then it will go back to Kimo. And you start to realize, oh, the italics are the thoughts of like the object of the previous sentence, who like could be a minor character or a main character, but all of a sudden you get a snippet of their thoughts. So it reads almost like a stream of consciousness story throughout the whole thing, and you're just reading and reading and reading, and like you're going in and out of timelines and perspectives and thoughts. And I will say it gets better as it goes, as you start to catch on to the story that's described in the jacket of these two guys escaping with a god to try and take over an empire. Like once it really gets into the story, it goes, and you're kind of caught up to all of Simon Jimenez's tricks at that point, and you're along for the ride. But it is a very different. You know, they say like you have to sometimes work out different muscles in your brain. This is a story where, after, years of reading hundreds of fantasy books, this one will work out muscles you haven't worked out in a while, and in the best ways. I am enjoying it. And the book is beautiful, obviously. Simon Jimenez is an incredibly talented author. No one asked him to write something this challenging, and he wrote it anyway. So I have a lot of questions for him. I hope to, reach out to him at some point. But highly recommended if you're someone that feels like you've read it all and are looking for a change of pace. If you're someone who's particularly interested in the theater and, wants to kind of bridge that gap more into fantasy, I would check this out as well. It evokes things like Broken Earth trilogy, just through the use of second person and multiple perspectives, and almost a surrealist kind of storytelling at times. Definitely check. I think this would be a good book to read after Broken Earth series. So yeah, that's The Spear Cuts Through Water. I haven't finished it yet. I'm about halfway through, so full review pending until I get to the end. But it was just already such a unique reading experience that I wanted to make sure we shouted it out today. And it's such a new release as well. So there you go, guys. If any of that sounded interesting to you, you would not be remiss to check this out. And it's a beautiful book just to have on the shelf too. Like the quality of it is insanely good. It's got these beautiful illustrations on the inside. Absolutely gorgeous. So highly recommend The Spear Cuts Through Water.
Way to use that video format here, Charles.
That's what I mean.
Yeah, and I think you do have some people interested here. You've got Mr. Rorost Sori, who is and needs to read that one. You got Jonathan, who seems intrigued by the point of view. Jonathan's an author. His sci-fi series starts with Goodbye to the Sun over there. So that's a great one to pick up as well. Who says that's wild? Read point of view, def up my alley. TBR for sure. TBRCon we did it.
Well, let me
We
know
got
your
something on the
thoughts,
TBR.
Jonathan.
So
If we just added one book to one TBR, then we've
it's all worth it.
done our job. So
Yeah, close down the conference convention. All right. Close it
yes,
down,
we did
Adrian.
do it.
It's done. We did it.
Thank you.
Mission
Thank you.
accomplished, like
Thank you,
sorry, I
everybody.
guess. But
Bye, everybody. Thank you so much. This has
yes,
been
that
great.
was fantastic. What a convention it was. But
No, we have a few minutes left to go.
That's
Just under 10 minutes here. I guess, Dylan, we each have a decent stack between us. Maybe now that we've, done our big chunk, maybe we should do like a little bit of a rapid fire and cover some of these.
Yeah, sure. Well, let's do a couple honorable mentions that I have. Oh, wow. I just dropped one of my honorable mentions. Dishonorable for me. So I'm going to pick that up. Look at this live video.
You better
format.
start with that one first. You make up for it.
Yes. Okay. So this one, Sea of Tranquility by Emily St. John Mandel, and better for the honorable mention one because I'm going to direct you to Adrian, actually our wonderful host of this convention, in our feature on SFF Addicts Pod. You can find that. Adrian talked about this book as one of his favorites of the year. This is by the author who brought to you Station 11, which is now that big HBO show. So it actually, I mentioned that Lost in Time was a finalist for that Goodreads User Choice Awards for last year. That's because it lost to Sea of Tranquility, which is a really phenomenal book. It jumps from way back in the mid 1900s all the way up to well in the future, where we have this whole moon colony going on and all these parallel stories. Oh yeah, nice way to drop that link over there, Adrian. So it's a really phenomenal book. I think the number one thing that comes to mind for me with Emily St. John Mandel is voice. She's just got prose and this voice that's not like anyone else that I've read. And she has this way of almost winking at the reader with this clever way of sometimes she'll take little digs at some of the characters, but it's always done in a subtle, deft manner. So really love this one. I'm not going to go too deep into it for this little honorable mention thing. And Adrian talks about it so well, so much better than I could in that episode. Literally, you'll see me be like, I talked about this recently, and I wish I could just cut out what you said and just paste it into our episode. So go check that out. But this phenomenal book.
Excellent. Well said, Dylan. My rapid pick is a book that I'm happy to make rapid because we've talked about it so many times, both on SFF Addict Pod and on our own show. And we've had the pleasure of working with the brothers Gwyn multiple times. I don't have the Hunger of the Gods in physical form, but I do have the Shadow of the Gods. Oh, hold that up, buddy. So he'll get these side by side. First of all, some of the best covers in the game. Some of the best covers in the game. Shadow of the Gods is book 1. Hunger of the Gods is book 2. Hunger of the Gods came out in 2022. So I'm just going to recommend the series. John Gwyn is a amazing storyteller, both from his own, he's a serious reenactor. All of his author pictures are him in chainmail, and they've got all kinds of really cool shields and swords and a vast knowledge base that inspires his Norse-inspired setting in this world. And I'll read the description really quickly. When the gods fought, it was a battle so savage they destroyed themselves, leaving nothing but their bones and the broken land of Vigrid in their wake. Now, as whispers of war echo over the fjords and across the plains, fate follows in the footsteps of 3 warriors. Blah, blah, blah. All 3 will change the course of the world as it once more falls under the shadow of the gods. And Dylan, when you have the word fjord in the description of the book, that you are for real in terms of Norse setting. It is really interesting.
You don't just drop a fjord willy-nilly.
The guy dropped fjord in the back of the book. So this guy's for real. I will say, any fan of John Gwyn from his previous works, he's famous for having gut-wrenching moments and really interesting action scenes. Just the way he describes someone tightening the strap on their helmet or forming a shield wall or something like that. Truly great. And I'll say The Hunger of the Gods as a second book in a trilogy does a great job in expanding. The first book has 3 character POVs. It's very Game of Thrones style, very different from Spear Cuts Through Water. It's the chapter is titled as the POV you're about to take, and then it goes, and then there's several chapters. So more traditional chapter structure here. And it just expands and grows in Hunger of the Gods. So if you like your skirmishes, your fjords, your monsters, we're talking dragons and Bloodsworn and this and that, it's a really exciting, fun, action-packed, Norse-inspired read. So if you haven't checked out John Gwynn's The Bloodsworn trilogy, check it out today. Highly recommend. And also check out the brothers Gwynn. They do amazing, booktube content similar to what we do. So definitely check them out. And just a fun little family of fantasy content creators over there that anyone in the space should go check out for some wholesome fantasy fun.
Yeah, I'll say on The Hunger of the Gods and just John Gwynn's work in general, I don't always have like the best movie running in my mind type way of reading. Like for me, it's kind of just more like flashes of images usually. But when I read John Gwynn's work, it is just like I can see it. Like I can see the movie. It is so cinematic. And it's just like blood sprays. It's like, whoa. So I think really the best fight and battle scenes in the game, I think. There's couple others I would definitely mention if we had the time, but that's right in there. So yeah, I think looking like we got like just a few more minutes. We'll wrap it up. But I'll just say last little honorable mention. I won't go into detail on it. And Charles, do you have one more honorable mention too? Was there?
I've got 2. I'll just say the names of, but just say the names of yours first.
Right. This is the first binding. This is good recommendation for fans of the Kingkiller Chronicle. It's very similar, eerily similar. So yeah, that is look,
Stutch, you're late.
Evan in the chat looking for a recommendation for fantasy book that takes place in a non-European setting. Here you go. Because if you like the Kingkiller Chronicle, Evan, which I don't think you've read that, but if you do, and you want something that is in a South Asian setting, because that's one of the ways it does differ from the Kingkiller Chronicle, the first binding by R. Verdi is for you, Evan.
Yes, Evan. And then we recommended 2 others today. We did what did we do? We did Final Strife. That is like a Ghanaian Arabian setting. We just did Bloodsworn, which is Norse. So definitely check out any of those.
That's a great option.
A couple of mine that I had really, really fast. Nick Martell, The Kingdom of Liars is the first book of this trilogy that he just finished. Yes. I mean, he's got a blurb from Brandon Sanderson saying excellent fantasy debut. So if you're a fan of Sanderson, and you're looking to see some of the new authors in the genre, check out Nick Martell. Also, Stutch, fellow Huntington alum here, but he chose roses over little V's, so we won't judge him too harshly for that. And then, of course, Saga Volume 10, after a long hiatus, they just recently released Volume 10. And if you have not read the first volume of Saga, stop what you're doing and read that next. 50 minutes left. It'll take 50 minutes to read this at most, and it's an incredible, incredible story. So check out Saga. And Dylan, I think we are up on time.
We are.
Thank you all. Yeah, we'll let that slide. Exactly, Stutch. We're very particular about our pizza on Long Island. So anyway, guys, thank you all so much for listening to this very exciting episode of the Friends Talking Fantasy Podcast live. Thank you for having us on, all the TBRCon Academy for having us here. We appreciate you.
The Academy.
And if you guys want to hear more from us, check us out on social at the FTF Podcast on Instagram and the FTF Podcast with the number 1 on the end on Twitter. Right, Dylan?
Right. I forgot. I almost forgot. Yeah, Jonathan's a Long Island guy too. We got
no
big
kidding.
Long Island presence
wow.
here. So anyway, yes, thank you all. Yeah, we're closing out right now on time. So yeah, really
Wow,
appreciate
we're
everyone who
on
stopped by
time for
in
the
the
first
chat.
time ever. Thank you
Yeah,
for Adrian for keeping us on track. So that is much appreciated. Thank you, everybody, for showing us some support today. I hope you enjoyed these books. And if you just added
thank you,
one of the,
McKenna.
I think we got some books on the TBR for some people, Dylan. I'm feeling very good.
At least one.
And enjoy the rest of TBRCon, everybody.
Enjoy.